Winnie had stopped crying. That silence hit harder than a scream ever could. Aveline Carver had heard cries of hunger, cries of fear, even those pitiful, painful little squeals babies make when their bodies are too cold to move. But now there was nothing, and nothing was terrifying. The wind howled around her like a curse. It chewed through the shawl wrapped around her shoulders, found every ripped seam in her boots, tore at her strength like it had a vendetta. The snow was up to her thighs now, wet and heavy, soaking the hem of her skirt, until it hung like ice-laced chains around her knees. She didn't cry. She didn't have the energy left to. Her legs moved because they had to, not because she believed there was anything ahead. Her breath came in ragged gasps, puffing out in desperate clouds that vanished too fast. Winnie's little head lolled against her chest, and Aveline shifted her higher heart, pounding. She couldn't feel her fingers anymore. 3 homes, 3 closed doors, 3 rejections. One woman had laughed. Another had told her to go back where you came from. A third had opened the door just wide enough to judge her bare ring finger and close it again. All she had now was a faint trail of chimney smoke curling above a line of cedar trees in the distance. One last hope. She forced her legs to keep moving. Almost there, she murmured to Winnie, though she wasn't sure the baby could hear. "Just a little further. Please stay with me, baby girl." The porch was 20 steps away. She counted them out loud. 1, 2. It gave her something to cling to. 3. Her knees buckled at step 16. She caught herself with a frozen hand against the post. Her palm stuck to the wood. She pulled it free, leaving a thin layer of skin behind. 17. The steps creaked beneath her weight, groaning in the cold. She reached the door and knocked once. The sound was pathetic, a dull tap against thick pine. No answer. She knocked again, louder this time. Nothing. Wind rattled the windows. Her knees gave out. She sank to the porch, clinging to the baby teeth, chattering so hard her jaw ached. And then she said it. Her voice came out as a hoarse, broken plea. "If someone doesn't open this door, we're both gonna die in the snow, and the snow won't cry for either of us." She reached out, laid Winnie gently on the porch boards, and backed away on hands and knees, arms raised like surrender. She couldn't protect her anymore. She couldn't even stand. "I just want her to live," Aveline choked out. "You don't have to help me, just take her. She didn't ask for any of this. Please." The door opened. It didn't slam, didn't swing wide like in the stories. It creaked. Slowly, deliberately. A man stood in the doorway, tall, broad face half-shadowed by the flicker of firelight behind him. His shirt sleeves were rolled past his elbows, and his hands were the size of dinner plates. He looked first at the baby, then at Aveline. She didn't move. Couldn't. Her breath came in short, sharp bursts, like her body was still trying to run, even after her legs gave out. The man stepped forward. He didn't say a word. Just crouched, picked up the bundle on the porch, looked at Aveline again, really looked, and then peeled off his coat. Without hesitation, he wrapped it around both mother and child. Then he reached beneath her arm and lifted her like she weighed nothing. Inside the cabin was warmth. Fire crackled in a stone hearth. A cast iron pot steamed on a hook. The air smelled like cedar smoke and old bread. The sudden heat made her dizzy. She gasped, lungs struggling to process it. Her vision blurred. The man sat her gently on a low bench near the fire, then turned toward a cupboard. "My daughter," she managed. "Please. She's breathing," the man said. His voice was deep-edged with gravel. Cold but alive. She bowed her head. Relief made her shake harder than the cold. I got goat's milk, he said, already moving. She'll need it. Thank you, she whispered. The man disappeared behind a curtain. From somewhere deeper in the cabin, a small voice piped up. Papa! A boy 6 or 7 appeared in the hallway. Tousled dark hair, big eyes. He was barefoot, clutching a wooden horse to his chest. Go on back to bed, Nico, the man said without looking. Is she sick? The boy asked, staring at Aveline. She's tired. Who is she? A visitor. The boy tilted his head as if trying to decide whether to believe that. Then nodded, turned, and padded back down the hall. The man returned with a tin cup. Warm milk, he said, handing it over. Not perfect, but it'll do. Aveline fed Winnie slowly. The baby stirred, then latched. Her sucking was weak, but real. Aveline couldn't stop the tears. She's okay, she breathed. She's eating. You both need sleep, he said. There's a room down the hall. Blankets on the bed. I'll stoke the fire through the night. Aveline looked at him. You don't even know my name. He shrugged. Don't need to. She hesitated. It's Aveline. He paused. Elia. She smiled, faint and tired. Thank you, Elia. Get some rest, he said, nodding toward the hallway. We'll talk in the morning. The bedroom was small but warm. A window frosted at the corners showed snow still falling, but softer now. Winnie slept curled beside her, breath shallow but steady. Aveline lay on her back, staring at the rafters. Her mind played the day on a loop, the snow, the rejections, the porch. The man who didn't speak much, but opened the door. The smell of wood smoke and something warm stirred Aveline awake. For a moment, she didn't move. The stillness around her was too unfamiliar. No screaming wind, no threat behind a locked door. Just the subtle groan of wood shifting in the cold and the soft breath of her daughter curled against her sina. She opened her eyes. Morning had come, or what passed for it in these mountains. Gray light slipped through the frosted windowpane, catching on tiny crystals clinging to the glass. Winnie stirred, fussed once, then went quiet again. Aveline sat up slowly. Every muscle in her body ached with the reminder of survival. Her limbs were sore but warm. That was something. The blanket around her still held the faint scent of smoke and pine. She glanced at the cradle someone had pulled from storage and placed beside the bed. Its presence alone told her this wasn't pity, it was intention. She eased out from under the covers, wrapped Winnie up, and stepped into the hallway. The fire still burned in the hearth outside, casting a soft glow over the main room. The man Elia stood at the stove, pouring hot water into a battered tin mug. His shirt sleeves were rolled again, revealing forearms marked by years of labor and solitude. A kettle hissed beside him. He didn't turn to look at her, but he knew she was there. There's coffee, he said simply, and bread if you're steady enough to eat. She shifted Winnie in her arms. I think I'm finally hungry. Elia gestured to a chair at the table. Sit. I'll get it. She moved cautiously, still unsure of the rules in this quiet, private place. As she lowered herself into the wooden chair, it creaked under her weight, but the warmth from the fire nearby reached her bones. She hadn't felt this grounded in weeks. Winnie whimpered. Elia glanced at her. She's still cold, no. Just restless. She doesn't like to be still for too long. He nodded. Good. Means she's got fight in her. Aveline cracked a tired smile. She gets that from her mama. He placed the mug of coffee in front of her, then set down a small plate with toasted bread and something thick and golden spread across it. "What is this bear fat and honey? Not pretty, but it'll keep you standing." She took a bite. It was dense, salty sweet, and strangely comforting. She closed her eyes for a second and just chewed, letting herself feel human again. "Your son," she began after a moment. "Nico. He's still asleep. Likely won't stir till the fire dies down. He's sweet. Brave, too." Elia didn't respond. He took a slow sip from his own mug and stared out the window. The silence stretched too long. Evelyn turned to glance around the cabin. There were few decorations. Everything looked used, nothing wasted. One wall held tools, another maps. But one door near the rear was closed, and the air around it seemed heavier. Oh. She looked back to Elia. "That room." He followed her gaze. His jaw tensed. "You don't have to answer," she said quickly. He set his cup down, walked over, and opened the door. The room behind it was dim. Dust clung to the air. A crib sat half-built in the corner, wrapped in an old quilt. Shelves were bare, save for a small wooden horse and a folded shawl. Aveline stepped closer, feeling like she was stepping into something sacred. Not haunted. Just waiting. "Elia." He didn't look at her. "She was supposed to be born here," he said. His voice was rougher now. "My wife. Clara. She died on the trail back from town. I made it halfway home before the snow buried the wagon. The baby didn't make it either." Aveline's hand tightened on Winnie's blanket. "I'm sorry." Elia finally looked at her. "The dead don't haunt this place. The living do." That sentence struck deep. Aveline felt it echo in her chest. She looked at the crib again, then at her own child asleep in her arms. "You left it untouched all this time." He nodded once. Didn't have a reason to finish it. They stood there for a while. No words passed between them, but something shifted. A threshold crossed, not of sympathy, but shared understanding. When they returned to the main room, Nico was standing near the fire, rubbing his eyes. "Can I hold the baby?" he asked groggily. Aveline smiled. "Maybe after breakfast." The boy grinned and shuffled off to the table. Elia poured another round of coffee and sat opposite her. "You're welcome to stay here as long as you need," he said quietly. No questions asked. Aveline studied him. There were no strings in his voice, just a quiet offering. But she knew enough about men to be cautious. Why, she asked. "You don't even know what I'm running from." "Don't need to," he replied. "You showed up carrying your whole life in your arms and left yourself behind on my porch. That says enough." Her throat tightened. "I've been running so long I don't know what staying even feels like anymore." He looked down at his mug. "It doesn't feel like peace, not right away. But it's quieter here. Quieter than wherever you came from, I reckon." She stared into the fire. Her mind drifted past the last 24 hours, past the cold, past the looks in town, the sting of doors slamming in her face. Mason's voice still echoed in her skull. She turned to Elia. "If he finds me, you won't be alone this time." He said it so simply, so clearly. It didn't sound like a promise made in haste. It sounded like a fact carved into stone. Outside, the wind was still restless, but inside, for the first time in weeks, Aveline didn't feel hunted. She rose from the chair, kissed Winnie's forehead, and turned toward the hallway. "I'm going to lay her down," she said, "if that's all right." Elia nodded. "Room's yours now." As she disappeared behind the curtain, Elias stayed seated, eyes fixed on the fire. Behind him, the half-finished nursery waited. Snow had stopped falling sometime in the night. By morning, the light filtering in through the cabin windows was sharp and pale, casting long shadows across the wood floor. It was the kind of cold that didn't bite, it sank. Deep, slow, steady. The kind that made you grateful for fire, or even just the sound of someone else moving around in the next room. Aveline stood at the edge of the porch, arms wrapped around herself, staring out over the white wilderness that had nearly swallowed her 2 nights ago. The trees were still and tall, their branches heavy with frost. Smoke rose from the chimney like a promise. Behind her, Nico laughed. A real laugh, light and clear, like only a child untouched by the world could make. He was sitting cross-legged near the hearth, showing Winnie a wooden horse that had lost one leg, but still galloped just fine in his small hands. The baby watched him fascinated. Aveline stepped back inside, brushing snow from her boots. Elia looked up from where he was splitting kindling near the door. "You slept?" he asked. She nodded. "Better than I thought I would." His eyes lingered on her face for a second longer than necessary, as if he could see the heaviness still clinging to her spine. Then he went back to chopping. She crouched beside Nico and the baby. "You're getting pretty good with her." "I think she likes me," he said proudly. "I think you're right." Nico picked up the horse, held it out to Aveline. "You can have this for her, if you want." Aveline blinked. "That's very kind of you. My papa made it for me when I was little." Nico lowered his voice, serious now. "Before Mama went to the stars." She didn't know what to say. Nico's words had the weight of grief behind them, shaped by a child's understanding of something much bigger than himself. Elias stood and cleared his throat. "I'll get breakfast going," he said. "You two keep watch." Aveline rose and joined him in the kitchen area. The stove radiated a lazy heat. She accepted the tin cup he handed her and sipped slowly. After a few moments of quiet, Elias spoke. "You planning to keep running?" She looked at him over the rim of the mug. "You trying to get rid of me?" "No." His voice was flat, but not cold. "Just want to know what you're thinking." She sighed and set the cup down. "I'm tired, Elia. Tired of sleeping with my boots on. Tired of looking over my shoulder. I came from Tennessee. Thought I'd start over out west. But the man I married," she shook her head, "he ain't someone you start anything with. He's someone you escape from. If you're lucky." Elia said nothing. Aveline glanced over her shoulder at Nico, who was still whispering stories to Winnie. "He'll come looking," she added. "He won't stop." Elia didn't flinch. "Let him come. You don't know him, I know enough. There's only one kind of man who lets a woman freeze with a baby in her arms." That sat heavy between them. Aveline turned back to her cup. "I never wanted to be anyone's burden." "You're not." She looked up. "You're sure about that?" Elia nodded. Then he said, "Don't give me your name if you're planning on leaving." The words hit harder than she expected. She stared at him. He didn't look away. She opened her mouth, closed it. Then softly, "Aveline Carver." "Elia Whitcomb," he replied, though she already knew that much. They stood there for a beat too long, like something unsaid had just passed between them, and neither knew what to do with it. Nico's voice broke the moment. "Papa, can we go outside today?" "Too cold," Elia called back. "Maybe tomorrow." Aveline smiled faintly. "You always this quiet. I talk when there's something worth saying." She liked that. more than she wanted to admit. Later that morning, Elia showed her how to start the stove from scratch. The matches were damp, but he had a way with kindling, slow, steady hands, careful motions. She watched him like she was trying to memorize it all. In return, she helped prepare the food. Her movements were rusty, but practiced. She'd worked a kitchen before, though not in years. "You cook like someone who's had to feed a lot of people," Elia said. "My mother had 5 kids. I was the oldest. She's still alive, not anymore." He didn't press. They ate in silence. Nico fed Winnie bits of soft bread under Aveline's watchful eye. The rest of the day passed in quiet rhythms. Aveline helped mend a torn sleeve from one of Elia's shirts. Nico showed her where the chickens used to roost in warmer months. She explored the edges of the cabin slowly, each room carrying the subtle weight of another life once lived. That evening after supper, she found herself back in the doorway of the nursery. She stepped inside. Dust still lingered in the corners, but the light was softer now. She ran her fingers over the edge of the crib. It had been built with love and then abandoned. Like everything else in Elia's past, it had been left untouched, waiting. She picked up the small wooden horse from the shelf and turned it over in her palm. Behind her, Elia stood in the doorway. "I think I'd like to finish it," she said, not turning around. He was quiet for a long time. Then, "All right. I'm not saying I'm staying forever," she added. "I didn't ask you to." But he didn't sound like he believed that. Later that night, as Aveline lay in the bed again with Winnie nestled beside her, she stared at the rafters. She thought about names. The ones you keep. The ones you leave behind. The ones people try to take from you. She thought about Elia's words. "Don't give me your name if you're planning on leaving." She had given him her name, and that scared her more than the snow ever did. The sun hung low over the small town of Coldwater, Montana, barely more than a dusting of buildings stitched together by snow-packed roads and rumors. Wind scraped dry across shuttered windows, and boots crunched hard on the wooden planks of the general store porch. No one looked up when the man in the long black coat dismounted his horse and tied it loosely at the post. He moved like someone who didn't need permission to exist. That was enough to keep people quiet. Mason Harkner wore his money on his collar, thick leather gloves, a gold pocket watch chain glinting at his vest, and a clean white shirt that had never seen dirt. His jaw was freshly shaved, his dark hair slicked back. But it was his eyes that made the sheriff nervous. Cold, empty, like nothing behind them needed to blink. Inside the sheriff's office, the stove crackled. Sheriff Dean Wilkins looked up from his paperwork just in time to see Mason step through the door without knocking. "Help you?" Wilkins asked, even though he already had a bad feeling he wouldn't like the answer. Mason offered a charming smile. "Name's Mason Harkner. I'm looking for my wife. Aveline. She's gone missing. Took our baby girl with her." Wilkins leaned back in his chair, studying the man. "That's so, she's not well," Mason continued, voice low and measured. "Sometimes she gets ideas in her head. Thinks people are after her. Thinks I'm the one hurting her." He sighed just loud enough to sound sincere. "I love her. Just want her home safe." "I believe she might be out toward the Bitterroot Range. Maybe with someone who don't know the whole story. You know how women can spin things when they're scared." Wilkins scratched at his beard, trying not to react. "You got papers?" Mason reached inside his coat and pulled out a folded letter. "Signed by a judge in Tennessee. Says I got legal custody and the right to bring her back. If she's found." Wilkins took the letter, squinted at the seal. It looked real. Might have been. The name of the judge was real enough, Judge Hammond, down in Nashville. But the more Mason spoke, the more the sheriff's gut twisted, and she just up and vanished, left in the night. Mason's voice softened like a preacher at a funeral. No warning. Took our daughter Winona. That girl means everything to me. I've been out of my mind trying to find them. Wilkins nodded slowly, the kind of nod that said he didn't believe a damn thing, but couldn't prove otherwise. Well, the sheriff said, folding the paper and setting it on his desk. If anyone sees her, I'll be sure to send word. Mason smiled. I appreciate that, Sheriff. I really do. He tipped his hat and stepped out, boots clicking. As the door swung shut, a second man across the street narrowed his eyes. Jonah Cade had been leaning outside the feed store, chewing on a matchstick and pretending not to listen. But he'd caught enough. The thing about men like Mason Harkner, they always came dressed in clean words and borrowed concern, but their eyes never matched their voice. Jonah had seen that kind of man before, and he'd watched too many decent people get swallowed because nobody asked questions fast enough. Jonah tossed the matchstick aside and walked into the livery, saddling his horse in silence. He moved quick but careful, pulling his rifle and checking the chamber before slipping it into the scabbard. He knew where the Whitcomb place was, tucked deep into the mountains, barely a path leading to it. Would take the better part of a day to ride hard less if the weather held. As he rode out of town, snow kicked up in his wake. Back at the cabin, Aveline was scrubbing a pot clean with cold water from the pump. Her sleeves were rolled, cheeks flushed from the wind. Nico sat near the woodpile, carving notches into a stick with his pocket knife, eyes focused. Inside, Elia rocked Winnie by the fire, humming something low and ancient, just a sound, no words. When Aveline walked back in, she paused to listen. That song, she said. What is it? Something my pa sang, Elia said. Don't think it had a name. It's nice. He didn't look at her. She likes it. She sleeps better when you hold her, Aveline said quietly. He shrugged. Babies know who's steady. Aveline sat down across from him. Her hands were chapped and red. How long do you think this quiet lasts? Elia looked up, eyes sharp. You feel it too, I always feel it. A beat passed. You planning to leave before he finds you? She didn't answer. You already gave me your name, he reminded her. I know. Elia didn't press. Instead, he glanced out the window, the sky already dimming. Storm coming in a few days. If anyone's planning to travel, they'll be riding today or tomorrow. You think he's close? I think men like that always get closer than you want them to. By dusk, Jonah's horse came barreling up the ridge. Elia heard the hooves first. He stepped out with his rifle across his chest, ready but calm. Easy, Jonah called out. It's just me. Elia lowered the barrel and stepped forward. Jonah. What brings you? Jonah dismounted in a rush, snow flying. You got a woman here, with a baby. Elia's face didn't move. What's it to you? A man named Mason Harkner's in town. Says he's her husband. Got papers. Sheriff saw him. Elia's expression darkened. He said she's crazy. Claimed she ran off in the night. She didn't run, Elia said flatly. She crawled. Nearly froze on my porch. Aveline stepped outside, holding Winnie tight to her chest. Jonah took off his hat. Ma'am, I don't know you, but you need to know he's not just looking. He's hunting. She swallowed hard. Jonah glanced at Elia. He'll come with the law, or at least the law on paper. Might even have the judge's word. Elia nodded once. Then we'll be ready. Aveline's voice shook. I can't let him take her. You won't, Elias said, stepping beside her. Not while I've got breath. Jonah looked between them, then at the trees beyond the cabin. You've got a day. Maybe two. After that, he'll come. Later that night, while Nico slept and the fire burned low, Aveline sat at the table staring at the folded piece of paper Jonah had brought with the judge's seal on it. She didn't touch it. Didn't need to. Elia paced near the hearth, slow and silent. Finally, Aveline said, "You still sure about this?" Elia didn't hesitate. "Mason Harkner doesn't find people," he said. "He hunts them." She looked up. "I've lived in fear so long I forgot what it feels like to be angry." "Good," Elia replied. "Hold on to that. You're gonna need it." Morning came heavy with silence. Not the peaceful kind. The kind that warned you something was shifting just out of sight. Aveline stood near the cabin window, watching snow drift lazily down in thick, lazy flakes. The sky was too still. Even the trees seemed to hold their breath. Elia had gone out before dawn to check the ridge. Jonah had stayed the night in the shed rifle near his cot and boots never unlaced. Nico, still unaware of the danger rolling toward them, sat cross-legged on the floor, carving tiny shapes into firewood scraps. Winnie fussed against Aveline's shoulder, small and squirming, hungry again. She didn't cry much anymore. That unsettled Aveline more than the crying ever had. A baby that learns to be quiet too fast is a baby who's learned the world doesn't always respond with kindness. She fed her slowly, one hand steady, the other stroking the infant's soft hair. Nico looked up. "Can I help with her today?" Aveline smiled. "You already do. Can I hold her while you eat?" She hesitated. "You sure?" He nodded, face serious as any grown man's. She passed Winnie carefully into his lap, guiding his arms. "Keep her head supported like this." "I know. I remember from when my cousin was little." Aveline walked to the stove, poured herself a cup of coffee. It was strong and bitter the way Elia made it, and it sat warm in her palms like armor. Jonah came in, then shaking off snow. His eyes scanned the room the way Elia's did, out of habit, not fear. "Elia's still up on the south ridge," he said. "Wants to see if anyone's moved through the timberline." "You think he's coming today?" Aveline asked. "I think he's close enough to try." Jonah poured himself a cup, too, leaned against the wall. "Winnie's strong," he said quietly, watching the baby in Nico's arms. "Most kids don't bounce back from a freeze like that." "She didn't have a choice," Aveline replied. "We had to keep moving. There wasn't another option." Jonah studied her. "You sound different than when you got here." She looked over at Nico. He was whispering something to Winnie, face full of care. "I feel different," she said. Jonah nodded, thoughtful. "That's good. Because if he does show up with that paper, Elia can't fight the law. Not with bullets, anyway." "What are you saying?" "I'm saying if you want to keep that child, it ain't just about running. It's about standing." Aveline swallowed. Her hands tightened around the mug. "I used to think surviving was enough," she said softly. "That if we could just make it one more day, it'd be worth it. And now..." She looked out the window again. "Now I know surviving without living isn't the same thing." Jonah didn't say anything. He didn't need to. Later that day, when Elia returned, his boots tracked in more than snow, they carried tension with them. His face was tight, jaw set. "He's in the valley," he said flatly. "Won't be long now." Aveline's breath caught. "How far? 2, maybe 3 miles out." "He's not rushing. Wants to make an entrance." Jonah cursed under his breath. "Damn buzzard." "We ready?" Elia asked. Jonah gave a curt nod. "Rifles loaded, sheds clear. We've got high ground if we need it." Elia turned to Aveline. You need to decide now. Do you want to hide or fight? She looked at Winnie asleep now in the makeshift cradle near the fire, then at Nico pretending not to be scared. I'm not hiding anymore, she said. Not for him. Elia didn't blink. Then we fight smart. We don't shoot first unless he tries something. You stay in the house. Jonah and I'll handle the talk. Aveline nodded. You'll need food before nightfall. I'll get something ready. No, Elia said quickly. You rest. Stay sharp. This is your home now. Let it protect you. She felt those words in her bones. This is your home now. For the first time in her life, someone said that and meant it. That afternoon passed in a blur of half-done tasks and waiting. Aveline changed Winnie's linens, boiled water, wrote a letter she didn't know if she'd ever send. She watched Nico build a fort from firewood, watched Jonah clean his rifle, watched Elia pace the front room like a wolf circling his den, and then hoofbeats, slow, measured, like a judge walking toward the gallows. Aveline froze. Elia opened the door before the knock came. Mason Harkner sat atop a sleek black gelding dressed in a long coat, gloves that didn't belong out here, and a smirk that hadn't changed since Tennessee. Well, he drawled, ain't this cozy? Elia stepped onto the porch, shotgun across his chest. You lost, Mason chuckled. Not hardly. I'm here for my wife. And daughter. Got legal papers if you're the type who reads. You got a warrant, Jonah asked from the corner. No need, Mason said smoothly. Judge Hammond granted me custody. That woman in there, she's unstable. Took off in the night with my baby. I'm here to bring them home. You mean drag them back where you can keep beating them in peace, Elia asked, voice flat as frost. Mason's jaw ticked. That's slander. No, Elia said. It's truth. Inside the cabin, Aveline stood near the window, watching. Her hands trembled, but she didn't move away. Winnie slept on the cot. Nico clung to her side, silent now. Mason dismounted, papers in hand. You're interfering with a lawful retrieval, Mr. Whitcomb. I suggest you let me pass. Not without her say-so. Mason's smile turned to ice. You really think she has the right to choose? And from the doorway came Aveline's voice. Where a baby cries, a home begins, and this is my baby's home now. Mason turned, startled. His smile faltered. You don't belong here, he hissed. No, she said. You don't. Jonah raised his rifle a hair. Mason's eyes darted. He wasn't used to being outnumbered or outwitted. He dropped the papers on the porch. You'll regret this. Maybe Elia said. But not today. Mason hesitated, then swung onto his horse. This ain't over. We're counting on it, Jonah said. Mason turned and rode off, snow kicking up behind him, like dust from a snake's tail. When he was gone, Elia stepped back inside and closed the door. The silence that followed was heavy but clean. Not fear, not shock. Just space. Real open space. Aveline exhaled for the first time all day. I thought I'd freeze when I saw him, she whispered. You didn't, Elia said. No, she said. I didn't. Nico came up beside her, eyes big. Are we safe now? She bent and hugged him. Not forever. But for now, For now we're safe. Elia crossed the room, brushing snow from his coat. He'll be back. I know, she said. And next time I'll be ready. It started with whispers. By the end of the week, they were more like claws. They scratched at doors, slid between cracks in the walls, took root in places that used to feel safe. Mason Harkner hadn't ridden back into Coldwater with guns drawn, but he'd come armed just the same, with his charm, his papers, his money. At the trading post, he told the storekeeper Aveline was mentally unstable, said she'd been delusional for years, claimed she'd run off more than once, each time more dangerous than the last. He flashed letters with the judge's seal, a photograph of their wedding day. A small bruise on his arm he insisted came from her throwing a lantern. The storekeeper didn't know what to believe, but he believed Mason had a wallet lined in gold and hands that never shook. At the chapel, he met with the preacher, donated firewood, spoke of God's forgiveness. The preacher nodded, said he'd pray for all involved. But when Mason left, the preacher's wife whispered that it didn't sit right, how his eyes didn't match his voice. By the time word reached the edge of the Bitterroot Trail, it had changed shape. A man with law on his side was searching for his wife. A woman had kidnapped her own child. Some folks said Elia was harboring a criminal. Others just shook their heads and muttered, "Always knew that Whitcomb boy was trouble." Aveline heard none of it firsthand, but she felt it. In the tightness of Elia's shoulders, in the way Jonah stopped coming up the trail, as often he didn't want to be seen leading anyone to her. In the silence of letters that didn't come from the town's post. She tried not to let it sink in, but every truth she'd ever known told her when a man couldn't win by force, he'd try to win with isolation. She'd lived that. It wasn't new, but she wasn't the same woman anymore. One morning with Winnie strapped to her chest, Aveline picked up the axe by the shed. Elia was tending to the animals, but when he saw her, he raised a brow. "You look like someone about to start a war." She stared at the log in front of her. "No," she said. "I'm building something." He watched her split the first piece of firewood with a sharp, clean strike. "You don't have to." "I want to," she cut in. "Every time I let someone do it for me, I forget what I'm capable of." He nodded. "All right then." That day she chopped firewood until her arms burned, carried water from the creek, baked bread that rose too fast and collapsed in the middle but still fed them just fine. She fixed the broken hinge on the back door with nails too long and a hammer too short. She cursed, then laughed. When night fell, she tucked Winnie into the crib and fell asleep beside her, hands, blistered heart steady. Jonah rode in again 4 days later. "They're talking about bringing charges," he said as soon as he dismounted. "Sheriff Wilkins says he's getting pressure from the judge. Might have to sign a writ." Aveline didn't flinch. "And if he does, they could send a deputy up here. Maybe more than one. Enough to make it official." Elia stepped forward. "That man touches her, or the baby there won't be time for paperwork." Jonah looked between them. "You can't shoot lawmen, Elia, not even if they're wrong." Aveline crossed her arms. "I won't run." "You might have to," Jonah said. "I won't," she repeated. "He's banking on that, on me running, on me folding when the world turns its back." She looked to Elia, voice low but steady. "A woman who stays is more dangerous than one who runs. He knows that. That's why he's scared." Silence followed. Then Elia said, "What do you need? A ride into town?" They both looked at her. "You serious?" Jonah asked. She nodded. "If they're going to speak for me, they better learn to speak to me." That Sunday, Aveline rode into Coldwater with her chin high and Winnie in her arms. She wore a borrowed dress from Elia's late wife, boots too big for her feet, and a look that said she was done asking for permission. The church was full. Mason sat in the front pew, back straight, hands folded like a saint. When Aveline walked in, heads turned. Whispers rose like smoke. She didn't stop walking until she stood in the center aisle, where the preacher paused, mid-sermon, startled. "I'm sorry for interrupting," she said, "but there's been talk, and I believe in truth, not just paper." The room held its breath. "I am Aveline Carver. Yes, I left my husband. Yes, I took my baby. Because staying meant death. Maybe not right away, but slow, quiet. The kind that doesn't leave bruises, but leaves you disappearing piece by piece." Gasps. Mason rose. "She's confused. She's not well." Aveline raised her voice. "I'm more clear than I've ever been. I loved a man who used that love to break me. I trusted him, and he turned that trust into a cage. I will not hand my daughter over to the same fate." The preacher's wife stood. "She's telling the truth." Others followed. One by one, women who'd been silent now stood, eyes wide, chins trembling. Not all of them spoke, but standing was enough. Mason's face tightened. The room turned colder around him, not because of weather, but because power had shifted. Later, outside the chapel, Aveline turned to the sheriff. "If you sign that writ," she said, "make sure you put your name on it, clear and bold. Because someday my daughter's going to ask who tried to send her back into hell." Sheriff Wilkins stared at her for a long moment. Then he tipped his hat, not in surrender, but respect. "I ain't signing anything today, ma'am." When Aveline rode back into the mountains, she wasn't a fugitive. She was a fire. And fires don't run. They claim ground. The first sign wasn't the sound of hooves, it was the hawk. Aveline had come to recognize it. The big red-tailed one that circled low when something stirred in the valley. It didn't cry out, didn't scream. It just soared lower than usual, cutting through the late morning clouds like it was warning her. "Look sharp. Something's coming." She stood on the porch of the cabin with Winnie tucked against her hip, snow crunching beneath her boots as she stepped down. The air was brittle, that kind of sharp-edged cold that came before a thaw. Behind her, Elijah emerged, rifle in hand. He'd seen the bird, too. "Riders," he said, without needing to be asked. Aveline didn't answer. She just held her child a little closer and watched the tree line. 3 men rode up the path by noon. One wore a badge, one carried a satchel full of court papers, and the third was Mason Harkner, grinning like he'd already won. The deputy was young, nervous. His name was Tate, and Aveline could see it written all over him. He didn't want to be here. But he carried a name backed by ink and law, and that was enough to make this official. Afternoon, he called, reining in beside the gate. Elijah didn't move. "Depends what kind of afternoon you're bringing." The man with the papers dismounted slowly. "Name's Graham Alder. I'm a court officer. We've come on order of Judge Hammond of Tennessee. Mr. Harkner here has been granted temporary custody of the child with retrieval authority extended to us." He pulled a sealed document from his satchel and extended it. Elijah didn't take it. Aveline stepped forward, calm but burning from the inside out. "What does it say?" Ram turned to her. "It says the child belongs with her legal father under conditions deemed safe by the court. You're not being charged, Ms. Carver, but the child must return with us." "She's not a horse," Aveline replied, voice sharp. "You don't just take her by title." Mason shifted in his saddle. "Let's not make this harder than it has to be. We've done this legal. There's no need for emotion." Aveline locked eyes with him. "No," she said. "Just lies. And money. And paper." Graham cleared his throat. "Ma'am, this isn't personal. The law is clear." She laughed. It was short, brittle. The law was clear when he left bruises on my ribs. When I went to the constable and was told, husbands have bad days. It was clear when I fled across state lines with nothing but a blanket and a baby who couldn't even lift her own head. She stepped down off the porch. You want to tell me about what's clear, Tate? The deputy looked down at his boots. The color had drained from his cheeks. Graham hesitated. Ma'am, this isn't the place. You made it the place, Elijah said, voice low and steady. Mason dismounted slow and sure, like a man claiming property. You've had your show, now hand her over. No, Aveline said. You don't have a choice. I do, she snapped. I have this child, I have this land, and I have something you don't, Mason. He raised a brow. Blood and papers ain't the same thing, she said. You may be her father by law, but you ain't her family. For a moment the wind held its breath. Then Winnie stirred in her arms, eyes wide and alert. She didn't cry. She looked at Mason, this man with sharp clothes and sharper eyes, and turned her face into her mother's chest. Mason stepped closer. You think that proves anything? Babies cry all the time. They grow up. They forget. She'll remember who held her when her feet were blue, Aveline said. She'll remember who whispered to her in the dark, who taught her to laugh. You think a court can erase that? Graham shifted. Mr. Harkner, maybe we should speak privately. No, Mason barked. I've waited long enough. He lunged. Too fast, too reckless. Elijah stepped between them in an instant, shotgun raised. Back off! Tate drew his revolver, trembling. Don't make me use this, a voice rang out from the woods. Drop it, kid. Jonah emerged behind them, rifle aimed, eyes hard. You pull that trigger, and the only person leaving this ridge is in a box. Graham threw up his hands. Everyone calm down. Aveline's voice cut through the standoff. Mason, look around. You're the only one here who thinks you belong. Mason didn't speak. Didn't blink. Leave, Elijah said. I have the law. You had your chance. The law don't live here. Graham sighed. We're not equipped for this. I'm calling this in. You do that, Elijah said. Just be sure you tell them what you saw. Tell them the baby never cried when I held her. Tell them the whole mountain stood still when he tried to take her. Tate holstered his gun. Jonah stepped closer. There's a preacher in town who'll testify, and 3 women who stood up last Sunday. You take her by force and it'll go south quick. Graham looked to Mason, but Mason wasn't looking at anyone. He was staring at Winnie. She was awake now, watching him. No fear, just the blank, unknowing stare of a child who didn't recognize the man in front of her. He turned. Without a word, he mounted and pulled his horse around. This isn't finished, he muttered. No, Aveline said. It's just started. They rode out in silence. As their figures disappeared behind the trees, Aveline finally let out the breath she'd been holding. Elijah came to her side. You all right? No, she admitted. But I'm here. Jonah holstered his rifle. You scared him. Good. Aveline looked down at Winnie. I didn't do it for that. I did it so she'll know someday that I didn't hand her over to a man who never once got down on her level and said her name with love. That night the fire burned longer than usual. Elijah mended a boot. Jonah stayed for stew. Nico sat by Aveline humming a lullaby he'd made up, and Winnie cooed softly in her cradle. No one said the word victory. It wasn't that kind of moment. But something had shifted. Aveline felt it in her bones. Not safety, but standing ground. She was no longer surviving someone else's choices. She was making her own. Snow had a sound when it fell. Not just quiet, but heavy quiet. The kind that blanketed the land, hushed your breath, slowed your thoughts. Out here in the high country, winter didn't ask permission. It just took. Took color movement warmth. Took everything that wasn't necessary and left you with only what you could carry in your hands or bones. The cabin creaked under the weight of a storm rolling through its second day. Ice webbed across the windows like lace stitched by ghosts. The fire had been burning without pause, and still the cold slipped in clever and thin like a rumor. Aveline sat at the table, boots unlaced, hands wrapped around a tin cup of weak tea. Winnie slept bundled in the bassinet beside the hearth, little fists twitching in dreams. Nico was lying on his belly, drawing in the ash on the floor with a piece of burnt wood. Elia, back from feeding the horses, stood by the door, shaking snow from his coat. Outside was white. Only white. Mountains swallowed by fog. Trees burdened to stillness. Inside was the world. Aveline looked up. You ever think it's strange how something so beautiful can feel like it's trying to kill you? Elia grunted as he hung his coat. That's the mountain for you. Looks like peace, teaches like war. She nodded. It's humbling. It's honest, he said. Never pretends to be kind. He moved to the stove and poured himself what passed for coffee. They'd been rationing supplies tighter since Jonah's last visit a week back. Town was snowed in. No news. No mail. No threats. But they all knew silence wasn't safety. It was just space. Aveline finished her tea and stood. She pulled on her coat, wrapped a scarf around her neck, and laced her boots with shaking fingers. Elia watched her. Where you going out back? Gonna try that axe again. You split enough wood to last 3 weeks. She gave him a look. It's not about the wood. He gave a small nod. Want me to go with you? No, she said. I need to be alone with it. Outside, the wind bit through the seams of her coat. She set the axe down by the chopping block and breathed deep. Her arms ached from yesterday and the day before that. But it was a good ache, the kind that came from doing, not fleeing. She lifted the axe, let it fall, again and again. Each strike chipped away more than ice and bark. It stripped back parts of her that had clung on for too long. Feared out the echo of Mason's voice telling her she was small. She wasn't small. The mountain didn't care who she was before. It only cared if she could survive it. The mountain doesn't care who you were before, she whispered aloud, sweat stinging her eyes. She struck again. By midday, her arms shook from the effort. But the pile of split logs had doubled. She dragged 2 bundles to the shed, stacking them beside Elia's own. The neatness of it filled her with a strange kind of pride. Back in the cabin, Nico had taken over, stirring the pot of beans. You were out a long time, he said. I needed it, she replied, taking off her gloves. Sometimes your body figures things out before your head does. He wrinkled his nose. That sounds weird. She smiled. Yeah, but it's true. That evening, Elia handed her the rifle. You want to learn, don't you? She took it without hesitation. They stepped outside under a gray sky tinted pink at the edges. He set up a crude target against a tree stump, showed her the parts of the rifle, how to hold it, where to press, when to listen to the breath. Her first shot missed. So did the second. The third clipped the edge of the stump and her shoulder stung from the recoil. But by the fifth, she'd found the rhythm. She lowered the rifle, ears ringing, heart louder than the shot. Elijah watched her without a word. "That feel like power to you?" he asked. "No," she said. "Feels like preparation." Later, when the fire crackled and the windows fogged from heat, she sat with Nico while he read aloud. The boy stumbled over long words, but he didn't give up. She corrected him gently, encouraged him when he paused. This was what Mason said she'd never be capable of. A home, a rhythm, a life. She glanced over at Elijah, who was oiling the rifle by the firelight. "You ever wonder," she asked, "if this is what people mean by freedom, not flags, not speeches, just quiet, ownership of your own time?" Elijah nodded. "Freedom's simple. Folks just like to dress it up in noise." She thought about that as she tucked Winnie in for the night, as she pulled the blanket up to Nico's chin and kissed his temple like it was the most natural thing in the world. She lay awake a long time that night, listening to the wind press against the walls, to the fire crackle like distant footsteps. When sleep came, it brought no dreams, only rest. And in the morning she woke early, before the boys, before the light. She fed the fire, boiled water, took her coat, and stepped out again with the axe. And when the sun finally rose, she was already working. The first thaw came quiet like a secret slipping beneath the door. One morning the snowdrifts shrank just enough to show dirt along the path. The roof shed its icy shell. A bird called from somewhere unseen, sharp and sudden, a note of green in a world still white. The wind still bit, but it no longer howled like it wanted you gone. It just passed through as if saying, "I'm done with you, for now." Aveline stood outside the cabin, hands on her hips, watching water trickle from the edge of the eaves, the slow drip of life returning. Behind her, Elijah emerged with his coffee and a grunt that sounded like approval. "Spring," he muttered. She smiled. "Just barely. You hear that bird, first one in weeks." They stood in silence for a moment, not needing to name what it meant. It wasn't safety, not yet, but it was motion. And after a long winter, motion felt close to hope. Inside, Winnie babbled in her cradle, playing with her fingers, her face rounder now, cheeks flushed with health. Nico sat at the table writing letters, bent over the paper, with the kind of focus that said, this mattered. He'd started asking to write to the town's school teacher, though he never signed the letters. Just questions. Just thoughts. Just the hope someone out there might write back. Aveline had begun teaching him math in the evenings. He took to it faster than she expected. Elijah helped him sharpen his reading patience with the stumbles. Sometimes they all sat together after dinner and read out loud from the old books Jonah had brought before the last storm. They didn't call it homeschooling, or parenting, or family. But that's what it was. Jonah showed up just after midday, coat open, rifle slung, horse foamed and winded. "Someone's coming," he said before even dismounting. Aveline stepped out onto the porch. "Mason number someone new. Says he's from the court. Got papers and questions. Claims he just wants to talk." Elijah narrowed his eyes. "You believe that I don't believe men who ride this far just to talk." But he wasn't armed. "He's a clerk, maybe, or something close." Aveline looked at Winnie, then back to Jonah. "Where is he now?" "Camped near the lower ridge. I didn't let him get close. Figured you'd want to decide how to handle it." She nodded. "I do." They waited until morning. Let the sun rise over melting snow and the last stretch of frost. Then Aveline, Elijah, and Jonah rode down to meet the stranger. He was younger than she expected, clean-shaven, nervous, wore a wool coat too thin for the weather. He stood as they approached, arms raised to show he was no threat. "Ma'am," he said. "Miss Carver," I assume Aveline stopped a few feet from him. "Depends who's asking. Name's Russell Dow. I work with the family court system back east. I was sent to assess what your child's welfare, your situation. I've been told a number of things, and I'm here to determine what's accurate and what's embellished." Aveline's jaw tightened. "Mason sent you. He requested review, yes. But I'm not working for him. I report to the judge." Elia stepped forward. "You here to take anything, you'll have to go through us." Russell held up both hands. "I don't want to take anyone. I just want to talk, see for myself." Aveline studied him. He looked too soft to lie well. She nodded. "You've got half an hour." They rode back up together. Russell's eyes wandered over everything: the cabin, the worn tools, the way Nico came out to greet them, and stood close to Aveline without needing to be asked. Inside, Winnie sat on a quilt, clapping her hands, trying to mimic Elia's whistling. Russell watched it all quietly. After tea and silence, he cleared his throat. "She seems healthy." "She is," Aveline said. "May I ask, do you feel safe here?" Aveline looked at Elia, then at Nico. Finally back to Russell. "I feel more than safe," she said. "I feel real." He scribbled something. "You have community support, Jonah. Preacher's wife. Sheriff Wilkins. We didn't ask for it. But it showed up when it counted. And this man, Elia, raised a brow. He's the one who found us when we couldn't walk anymore. Who stayed when it was easier to look away. He's not her blood," she added, glancing at Winnie, "but that never mattered." Russell looked up. "You don't choose a family," she said, voice quiet. "You build one. And what we built here, Mason couldn't buy it if he tried." Russell paused. "I don't have the authority to make decisions here, only to report. But I've seen children removed from places with cleaner walls and full cupboards and still come out broken. This is not that." Aveline swallowed hard. "Then write the truth." "I will," he said. "But the truth has to hold when men like Mason twist it." She met his gaze, then twist it back. He left before sundown, promising to deliver his report within the week. They didn't know if it would help, but it felt like air in the lungs. After he left, Aveline sat out front on the porch while the others worked inside. The sky was pink with evening. Birds sang again in the trees. Not many, but enough. Winnie crawled to her feet by the edge of the chair and pulled herself up using Aveline's skirt. Her little fingers clutched tight, and when she looked up, her face broke into the widest grin. "Mama," she said. It was soft, slurred, but clear. Aveline's heart stopped. She scooped the baby up into her arms, eyes burning. "Say it again," she whispered, pressing her cheek to her daughter's warm skin. "Just once more." But Winnie just giggled and patted her face. Inside the cabin, Elia glanced out the window and saw them. He didn't smile, but something deep in his eyes shifted, settled. Aveline didn't speak of the moment that night. But when she went to sleep, she knew one thing with certainty. They were not hiding anymore. They were home. The letter came on a Tuesday, tucked in the folds of a sack of flour Jonah brought up from town. He didn't say a word when he handed it to Aveline, just tipped his hat and walked his horse to the shed. That silence told her more than words could. She sat on the porch with Winnie on her knee and the letter in her lap. The envelope was thick edges, clean and official. Her name was written in a clerk's hand, not Mason's, but she could feel him in it anyway. Like smoke and cloth. Like a shadow you thought you'd outrun. Elia stood nearby, leaning against the post, arms crossed. "You want me to read it first?" he asked. Aveline shook her head. "I have to see it." She broke the seal with steady fingers. Inside 4 pages, each more clipped and cold than the last. Legal wording. Court terms. Montana jurisdiction. Mason had filed for full custody this time through a regional judge who didn't know her story, only the facts he'd painted. She read it once, then again, slower. Winnie tugged at the hem of her sleeve, oblivious to the storm gathering in the words on that page. Elia didn't ask what it said. He waited. Finally, Aveline looked up. "He's not just pushing now. He's planning to drag me into a courtroom, one where he controls the story." Elia didn't blink. "Then we tell our own. You think that matters in front of men who never met me? I think what matters is you've got people who have." She folded the letter and tucked it into her coat. "He knows I won't leave this place, so now he's trying to gut it from the inside. Use the law like a knife." "That means he's desperate," Elia said. "He's not trying to win, he's trying to take." She stared off toward the trees where winter still clung to the upper branches. That night after supper, Nico pulled out the little wooden heart he'd been carving. He'd meant it as a gift for Winnie's first birthday, but he handed it to Aveline instead. "You look sad," he said. She knelt down, holding the heart. It was rough around the edges, but shaped with care. "I'm not sad," she whispered. "Just tired of fighting for things that should never be questioned." "You're not fighting alone." His words hit harder than she expected. Later, after everyone had gone to bed, Aveline sat by the fire and watched it burn low. Elia came and sat beside her, close enough that their shoulders touched. "You thinking of going?" he asked. "To court?" He nodded. She didn't answer for a while. The fire crackled spit sparks that danced up the chimney. "I'm thinking about what it costs," she said finally. "Leaving here, facing him, sitting in a room where the truth gets weighed against money. You're stronger than that court. That's not what scares me. What does?" She looked down at her hands. "That I'll get there and forget how to speak. That I'll let him twist me up until I'm just, shadows again." Elia's voice was quiet but sure. "You're not who you were." She nodded. "I know." Then she turned to him. "Do you regret it, letting us stay?" "Not for a second." "You didn't ask for this." "I didn't have to," he said. "It showed up cold and crying, but it stayed, grew roots, built walls around itself and called it home. That's not something you walk away from." She took a long breath. "I used to think love was a feeling," she said. "Something that showed up when things were soft and easy." Elia looked at her steady and open. "And now I know love is a choice you keep making," she said. "Especially when things get hard." His hand found hers beneath the blanket. He didn't kiss her. Didn't need to. The closeness was enough. The shared silence. The firelight catching in his eyes like something ancient and patient. The next morning, she made her choice. Jonah agreed to ride with her to file a counterclaim. Preacher's wife wrote a letter of support. Sheriff Wilkins added his statement signed and witnessed. Before she left, Nico pressed a folded piece of paper into her hand. "It's not a real letter," he said, "but I wrote it like one." She didn't open it until she was halfway to town, the horse jostling gently beneath her. The note was short. sloppy. If you go to court and forget how to speak, just remember how it felt here. Remember the smell of the stew, the noise Winnie makes when she's mad, how Elia cuts wood too loud. That's your voice. Don't let him take it. She folded it carefully, put it in her coat pocket, right beside Mason's letter. 2 truths, side by side, but only one would carry her. In town, the air was thick with mud and thaw. Horses sloshed through streets. Women carried baskets heavy with spring onions. Life moving on indifferent to fear. But when Aveline walked into the courthouse, every step echoed. The clerk at the front desk looked up surprised to see a woman alone. "I'm here to respond to a custody claim," she said. "Filed out of Tennessee. Now filed here." The woman blinked. "Name Aveline Carver." The name didn't tremble this time. Later back at the cabin, Elia had cleared space on the mantel. For what she asked. "For whatever comes next," he said. He didn't need to say it. The next thing wasn't going to be easy, but it would be theirs. The courthouse in Missoula stood tall and stone cold like it had something to prove. Its front steps were chipped from decades of boots and winter ice. Ivy crept up one side, stubborn against the gray. Aveline had never seen it before, but the moment she stepped through the doors, she felt like she'd been here all her life, at least in spirit. The waiting room smelled like dust and wood polish. Women sat with clasped hands. Men leaned stiff against walls. Lawyers passed by like wind with suits. Elia was beside her. Jonah 2 seats down. Nico stayed back at the cabin with Widow Carter, but he'd made her a new letter shorter this time, written in crooked pencil. "No matter what, we're still us." Aveline kept it folded in her coat pocket. Same one she'd worn when she first arrived, in the Bitterroot's torn hem and all. She liked it that way. Honest. When her name was called, she stood without hesitation. Courtroom 2A was full. Not packed, but full enough to matter. Mason was already seated with his lawyer, a thin man with small eyes and expensive shoes. Mason looked like he belonged there. Pressed suit, hair slicked, chin up, like he'd already decided how it would go. Aveline took her seat on the other side. Elia didn't sit. He stood in the back, arms folded. Judge Caldwell entered with a shuffle and a nod. Mid-60s, stern but not unfriendly. The kind of face that saw more than you wanted it to. They began with statements. Mason's lawyer painted a portrait. A well-meaning man. A wife with emotional instability. A child taken across state lines. "All my client wants is a fair arrangement. A chance to raise his daughter." He even called Mason a victim of abduction. Aveline didn't flinch. When it was her turn, she stood. "I didn't come here to play victim or throw blame," she said. "I came here to say the truth out loud." And she did. She told them about Tennessee, about cold nights and bruises, about silence that was taught, not chosen. She told them about Winnie's birth, the blue skin, the bleeding, how Mason never looked at his child like she was real, only like she was a mistake that cried too loud. "I left because I knew if I stayed, I'd vanish," she said, "one piece at a time, and she'd grow up learning that love comes with fear." Her voice didn't shake. Not once. Mason leaned in to whisper something to his lawyer. Then came the witnesses. The preacher's wife first. Pearl Whitmore, hat askew, purse clutched like armor. She spoke of the Sunday Aveline walked into church holding her baby like a shield and told the town the truth. She didn't cry or beg, Pearl said. She stood, and that did more for this town than 10 sermons. Next was Jonah. Her leaving wasn't abandonment, he said. It was survival, and everything she's done since has been rebuilding what was broken. Then came the surprise. Russell Dow, the court officer from the Ridge. I was sent to observe, he told the judge. What I found wasn't a criminal. It was a mother making a life in the hardest part of this country with more dignity than most men I've written reports on. He paused. She didn't ask me to speak, but silence felt dishonest. Mason shifted, clearly agitated. Then Elias stepped forward. He didn't wear a suit, just his work clothes, boots caked in trail dust, shoulders wide as the door he walked through. I never asked for a family, he said. But one came, cold and tired and half-starved, and I didn't take them in because I pitied them. I took them in because they fit, like they were always meant to be there. He looked toward Aveline, then at the judge. The ground we stand on fights with us, he said. And if you'd seen how hard she fought day in, day out, you'd know this isn't about law. It's about truth. And the truth is, he don't know that child, and he don't deserve the right to own what he never earned. There was a stillness in the room after that. Not tense, just full. Mason's lawyer called 2 witnesses, a doctor from Tennessee who barely remembered the delivery, a neighbor who repeated gossip more than fact. Neither could look Aveline in the eye. Then Mason took the stand. He spoke smooth. He smiled at the judge, said he regretted his temper, said he was working through past mistakes, and ready to be a better man. He never said Winnie's name. When cross-examined, Aveline's lawyer asked, "What color are your daughter's eyes?" Mason blinked. "Blue," he said. "They're hazel." Mason's jaw tightened. The court clerk scribbled something. They recessed for deliberation. Aveline sat back, the ache in her body finally rising to the surface. Elias placed his hand over hers, strong and steady. Jonah passed her a flask under the table. She didn't take it, but smiled anyway. "You did it," Elias whispered. "No," she said. "We did. It took an hour." The judge returned and delivered the ruling in one slow breath. Temporary custody granted to Aveline Carver. No visitation granted to Mason Harkner unless reviewed by the court, again in 6 months, pending behavior and witness support. He used words like provisional and monitoring, but they didn't sting, because the door had closed. And Mason's face for the first time looked small. Outside, the cold had lifted. The sky wore spring like a fresh coat. Sunlight skimmed the courthouse steps. As they stood in the light, Jonah slapped Elias on the back. "Well," he said, "if that wasn't the loudest silence I ever sat through." Aveline exhaled and reached down to touch her daughter's cheek. Winnie babbled, then reached toward Elias. He picked her up without hesitation. Aveline smiled. "We're not running anymore." "Nope," Elias said. "Now we build." The last of the snow melted slow, like it didn't want to say goodbye. It hung on in the shadows behind the shed and in the curve of the creek bend where the sun still couldn't reach. But the rest of the valley had turned green. Wet, wild green that smelled like new life and second chances. Aveline knelt in the dirt behind the cabin, hands sunk deep in the dark soil. The garden rows were uneven, clumsy, but they were hers. She planted without knowing if the seeds would take. That was the gamble of it all, putting something in the earth and hoping it might grow. Winnie sat nearby on the blanket, chewing the corner of a wooden spoon, humming to herself. Every now and then Aveline looked over just to watch her, still amazed that this little girl, this small miracle, was real and whole and safe. Jonah had delivered the final court papers last week. Custody confirmed. Mason had gone quiet, no appeal, no noise. Maybe he'd seen the writing on the wall. Or maybe he'd finally realized the law couldn't fix what he'd broken. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was peace. Nico came running from the creek, wet to the knees and breathless. "There's fish," he shouted. "I saw 'em, real fat ones." Elia leaned on the porch rail, one eyebrow raised. "You catch any?" Nico shook his head, grinning. "Not yet. But I will. You'll see." Aveline smiled as he tore past her toward the shed, probably in search of a pole. The boy had changed, grown. His shoulders sat differently now, less like armor, more like someone settling into their own skin. She wiped her hands on her skirt and stood watching Elia as he came toward her. His shirt was rolled to the elbows, boots, muddy face sun-kissed from days working the fields and clearing trails. "Garden looks good," he said. "Looks like a beginner," she replied, brushing hair from her face. "But I figure everything does at first. That's how you know it's worth doing." He crouched beside her, fingers grazing the sprouting rows. "You think it'll grow?" she asked. "Think you will," he said simply. They sat like that for a long time. No need for more words. Just the sounds of the land waking up around them whined through new leaves, Nico's laugh echoing across the ridge, a hawk circling high in the blue sky. Eventually, Elia reached into his pocket and pulled something out. A small carved ring, wooden, smoothed down like river stone. She recognized it before he even spoke. It was from the piece of pine she'd whittled that night by the fire weeks ago. She'd left it on the shelf. Didn't know he'd kept it. He held it out in his palm. "I got no church speech," he said. "No preacher lines. Just this." She looked at the ring, then at him. "And what are you asking?" He tilted his head. "Same thing I've been asking without words since you got here. Stay. Not as a guest. Not just as Winnie's mama. Stay as ours. Stay and call this yours." Tears pricked her eyes, but she didn't cry. Instead, she reached out, took the ring, and slid it onto her finger. It didn't shine, but it fit. Inside, the fire crackled, not because it was cold, but because some habits were worth keeping. The cabin smelled of stew and soap and wood smoke, the scent of a place lived in, not just survived. Nico dragged a fish through the door an hour later, shouting about supper. Elia helped clean it. Aveline stoked the fire. Winnie took her first wobbly steps across the rug, while everyone cheered like it was the best thing that had ever happened, which, to be fair, it might have been. That night they ate by lantern light. Elia told a story about the first time he got kicked by a mule. Jonah laughed so hard he nearly dropped his plate. Nico fell asleep halfway through a book about wolves and stars. Aveline stayed up after everyone else had gone quiet. She sat by the window looking out over the dark ridgeline. Her fingers brushed the windowsill, rough wood, familiar grooves. The night air smelled of pine and damp earth. Behind her, the fire burned low. Not all fires burned things down. Some lit the path forward. She thought of the woman she used to be, the one who ran in the dead of night, barefoot and bleeding, clutching her daughter like a shield. She thought of the silence she carried, the shame Mason had planted like poison. And now she stood in the same place where she once hid, but she was no longer hiding. She was rooted. The mountain hadn't healed her. It had forged her. Because healing wasn't soft. It wasn't flowers and light and whispered prayers. It was hard choices and cold mornings and planting seeds not knowing what would bloom. It was saying yes when you were scared. It was staying when it was easier to run. It was reaching for the life you chose, not the one handed to you in fear. She looked over her shoulder at the sleeping forms scattered across the room, her child, her son, not by blood, the man who had become more than a protector, more than a partner. This was her family. Not perfect, but true. She whispered into the dark, we weren't saved. We were rebuilt. And that was better. Because what you rebuild, you understand. You protect. You love with your eyes open. She stood, fed the fire one last log, and turned toward sleep. Tomorrow she'd plant tomatoes. The day after, maybe corn. There'd be fences to mend, clothes to patch, books to read, dreams to stretch toward. But tonight was whole, and that was enough.